So, the question of whether God exists is something people have been debating for like forever. You know how sometimes late at night we get into those deep conversations about life, the universe, and what it all means? This is one of those big ones. Some people are absolutely certain that God exists, while others are equally sure that there's no God. Then there are those in the middle who say, I don't know, and maybe no one really does. It's not a simple question, and the answers can be really personal, but there are a few main ideas people usually talk about when they try to figure it out. The arguments for God's existence. A lot of people believe in God because, to them, the universe itself seems like evidence. Think about it. How did everything come into existence? This is where the cosmological argument comes in, which is also called the first cause argument. The basic idea is that everything we see, trees, mountains, even us, has to have a cause. Nothing just pops into being without something making it happen. So if you trace everything back to the very beginning, people who believe in this argument say that there must have been a first cause, something that set the universe in motion. For them, that something is God. One version of this argument, called the Cosmological argument, says the universe had a beginning, which science backs up with the Big Bang theory, and because it had a beginning, it must have had a cause, and that cause must be outside of time and space, like God. Another argument is the teleological argument, or the design argument. This is when people look at how complicated and perfectly ordered everything is, from the laws of physics to the way ecosystems work. You've probably heard people say something like, look at the way the human body works. It's so intricate, it couldn't have happened by chance. It's the same idea with the universe. Everything seems too finely tuned for life to just be a big cosmic accident. The argument is that if you walked into a room and saw a watch on the floor, you wouldn't think it just appeared out of nowhere. You'd assume someone made it. In the same way, people say the universe seems like it has a designer. And then there's the moral argument. This one's interesting because it's about how we all seem to have a sense of right and wrong. Even if we disagree on details, most people believe certain things are just wrong, like hurting innocent people or stealing. So where does that moral compass come from? People who support this argument say that if there's no higher power, no God, then there wouldn't be any objective right or wrong. Morality would just be people's opinions, not something deeper. But since most of us feel like there are real moral laws, like certain things are wrong no matter what, that might point to a moral lawgiver, which many believe is God. Then there's the ontological argument, which is a bit more philosophical and abstract. It goes like this. Imagine the greatest possible being you can think of. By definition, God would be that being, the greatest thing you could imagine. But if God only existed in your mind and not in reality, then you could imagine something even greater. A God that exists both in your mind and in reality. So by that logic, God has to exist in reality, not just in people's imaginations. It's a bit of a head-scratcher, but some people find it convincing. Lastly, many people believe in God because of personal experiences. You hear stories all the time about people having spiritual experiences, feeling a sense of God's presence, miracles, or answered prayers. For those people, these experiences are real proof that God exists, even though they're more personal and subjective. The arguments against God's existence. Of course, not everyone agrees. Some people point to the world around us and say, if God exists, why is there so much suffering? This is known as the problem of evil. Imagine if God is all-powerful and all-loving, why would he allow things like natural disasters, disease, or even human cruelty? If God could stop these things but doesn't, some people say that either he doesn't exist, or he's not the all-good, all-powerful being that many people believe in. This argument doesn't just come from logical reasoning, it's also really emotional. People who have experienced loss or suffering often wrestle with this question. Another reason some people doubt God's existence is because of science. Over time, science has explained a lot of things that people used to attribute to God. For example, before we understood weather patterns, people thought storms were caused by gods being angry. Now we know about things like air pressure and wind patterns. Some people argue that the more science explains the natural world, the less we need God to explain it. The Big Bang Theory and evolution are scientific explanations for how the universe and life came to be without needing a creator. This doesn't mean that everyone who believes in science is an atheist. Lots of people believe in both God and science. But for some, the more they learn about the natural world, the less they feel like God is necessary to explain it. Then there's the issue of inconsistent revelation. If you look around the world, there are so many different religions and they all have different ideas about God. Some believe in one God like Christianity, Islam and Judaism. Others believe in many gods like Hinduism, and some religions like Buddhism don't necessarily have a traditional God at all. This variety makes some people question how we can know which, if any, of these ideas about God is right. If God exists, why would he let there be so much confusion? And finally, for some people, it just comes down to evidence. They feel like there's no clear, undeniable proof of God's existence. If God is real, they wonder why we can't see or measure him in the same way we can with other things in the universe. Since there's no direct, empirical evidence that everyone can agree on, they conclude that it's more likely that God doesn't exist. What about agnostics? Then there are people who aren't sure, the agnostics. They're basically saying, I don't know, and maybe no one really can. For them, the evidence on both sides just isn't convincing enough to make a clear decision. They might say things like, maybe there's a God, but I don't think we can really know for sure, so they stay open to both possibilities. You also have people who are skeptical in general. They might believe that human beings just don't have the capacity to fully understand something as big and mysterious as God. They'll say that whether or not God exists, it's beyond our ability to figure out. So they're not necessarily rejecting the idea of God, but they're questioning our ability to prove or disprove it. Conclusion. So does God exist? Honestly, it's a question that each person has to answer for themselves. Some people find the arguments for God compelling, while others don't. For some, personal experiences and faith make the question feel settled. Others rely on science and reason to guide their beliefs. And for a lot of people, it's still an open question. The search for an answer can be a lifelong journey, shaped by our experiences, what we read and learn, and even the late-night conversations we have with friends. At the end of the day, the question of God's existence is deeply personal, and the answer may look different for everyone. What matters is the journey of exploration and understanding, and the fact that this question has been asked for thousands of years means it's likely going to be one we keep asking for a long time to come.